Israel. Saying that name is enough to get people's attention, to cause some weird looks, or to cause a heated discussion. So many people have an opinion about Israel. Some hate it, others don't even want to recognize it, and some are just in love with it. And there are some who think that Israel, a tiny country with 8.5 million people, is responsible for as many problems in the world as you can think, especially the problems in this world. But hey, let's focus on the conflict. We have three parties here: Israel, the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza under Hamas. The two Palestines here are not really allied, and Israel deals with both of them separately. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is also backed by the Arab League and most of the Islamic world. Many states don't even want to openly support the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip, because Hamas is an Islamist terrorist organization that was elected by the Gaza population, while some countries openly support it or at least defend it. Israel has been very much standing alone in this conflict over the last decades, despite their good international relations, except for the support of the Jewish diaspora and the United States of America, an ally that is today essential for Israel's survival. But while there are so many conflicts in this world, why are so many nations, so many unions, so many people directly or indirectly involved in this conflict? What is really going on? Let's go into history and find out. For better navigation, depending on what you're interested in, you can go to the specific parts of this video through the pinned comment. I will talk about the history before the conflict, about Zionism, the British era where the conflict began, the time after Israel's independence, today, and lastly, the Islamic world against Israel. Hebrew people lived in this area over 3,000 years ago. In rather traditional sources with some historical support, we see the Kingdom of Israel and Judah ruling here 3,000 years ago. And more historically documentable, we find a Jewish autonomous kingdom, the Hasmonean Kingdom under the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire. Afterwards, Jews lost their autonomy and became mere subjects under future rulers until they were expelled and eventually came back. The region was ruled by the Romans, the Persian Sassanids, the Byzantines, the Islamic Caliphates, Egyptian Islamic dynasties, Seljuks, the Crusaders, the Ayyubid Caliphate, the Mamluks, and finally the Ottomans. You see what a mess this is. Islamic rule came first with the second caliph and companion of Muhammad, Omar. He conquered this region during the early Islamic conquests and heavily Islamized this region, while also admitting the formerly expelled Jews back into the region. Jews were previously expelled by others, now they were back, but they were also reduced to second-class citizens under the Islamic dhimmi system, with major religious restrictions that included bans on Jews entering specific places, holy places for Jews. Jews, like Christians, were also forced to pay protection money and to wear distinct clothing that marked them as Jews, as Jewish infidels, completely in accordance with Islamic law. Jews underwent massive massacres under both Muslim rule and future Crusader rule, and found their peace slowly in the Mamluk Sultanate, and eventually in the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, Jews also became the absolute majority in Jerusalem, and a large minority in the region at the end of the 19th century, through migration and land purchase. But complete religious freedom was never secured, and the Ottoman Empire made heavy restrictions on Jewish immigration. In the late 19th century, an important man, Jewish Austrian journalist and activist Theodor Herzl, published a pamphlet in Germany and Austria called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and formed the modern Zionist movement. In this pamphlet, he proposed the unity and settlement of Jews in either Argentine or the historic Jewish home Palestine, in order to end the seemingly endless suffering of Jews under the rule of others. According to him, this newfound secular state should be non-interventionist, in alliance with Europe, militarily neutral and defensive, a state that doesn't conquer or colonize. The land should be taken, with the agreement of whoever holds the land, to rule in this land autonomously or independently, while also helping whoever gave them the land. Argentine was an option because it had a Jewish population, had a scarce population of its own, and had a lot of potential that Jews could bring out. But Palestine was preferred because it was always home to Jews and had religious cultural importance. Herzl thought that the Ottoman Sultan would agree because Jews would bring a boom to the economy. But things changed not long after. World War I broke out. Herzl had died, but his dream lived on, and it was now the British Empire that ruled over this region, not the Ottoman Empire that lost the war. The region was now practically part of the British Crown. Historically, a state or a nation seizes land in war, comes to an agreement or eliminates the previous holder, and is then entitled to the land. In this case, the British took control of the region, previously held by the Ottoman Empire, and then started making plans for it. This is where it gets a bit complicated and weird. The Brits made 3 different agreements or promises for this region before and after they captured it. The first promise was to grant this land to Hussein bin Ali, a leader in Arabia who had been invited by the Brits to revolt against the Ottomans for Arab independence. This promise was broken when the Brits gained control over the region by themselves. The second promise was the Balfour Declaration, a public declaration of support for a Jewish home, but also for the protection of the people who lived here and their rights. They thought it was possible to create a home for both Jews and Arabs. The third was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret correspondence between the British and the French, in which the region would be split and annexed between the French and the British Crown. This secret agreement was revealed by the Russian Bolsheviks after the Russian Revolution. It contradicted with the promise to the Zionists and also angered all other parties, especially the Arabs, who saw this rightly as a great treason. The plan was a disaster and never came into existence, although conspiracy theorists still claim it is somehow in action. At the end of the World War, the League of Nations was formed, and regions held by the UK were now officially recognized as mandates. A mandate was an entity administered by whoever has power, in order to form new working entities in the controlled regions, or to administer them until they can become self-sufficient and independent. The UK's aim was clear: create a home for both Jews and Arabs, but also keep them close to the UK. It didn't really go very well. Initially, both Jewish and Arab authorities were installed in order to recover from the war, stabilize the economy, and have equal opportunities for the bright future of their own people. The Zionists were fine with it and started working. The Arabs were not. They considered all of this an occupation. They had no understanding for the war result, and didn't want the British administration and any Jewish influence and immigration at all. The Arabs staged major revolts in 1920, 21, 29, and 36. These riots were very violent and caused a massive displacement of Jews from specific regions and attracted more Arabs from outside the region. The 1936 revolt was the largest, but it was also a major defeat for the Arabs, and consequently the British expelled many of the responsible Palestinian leaders, and some fled. One of them was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, who first fled to neighboring lands and eventually to Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Let's come back to that in a bit. After this major revolt, the Brits ordered a commission, known as the Peel Commission. This commission investigated the whole conflict and concluded that the mandate of Palestine had become unworkable and suggested a new plan: the partition of the region into a Jewish state and an Arab state. This was the first official plan for a partition. The plan was never adopted due to disagreements on both sides. Instead, the British Crown introduced the White Paper in 1939, a one-state solution for Jews and Arabs, once again. You can see that the Brits had big difficulties settling this conflict. This plan also restricted Jewish immigration heavily and made restrictions on further land purchase by Jews. The Jews had purchased a lot of land from Arabs before, and this was seen as a cause of the unrest. This deal stayed in effect until 1948 and served as a buffer that prevented the conflict from getting worse. Jews had been mostly defensive and retaliatory prior to this plan, in that they defended themselves against British authorities and Arab attacks and responded with revenge actions. But now, some Jewish groups lost hope for a solution and lost their trust in the British Crown and created local violent militia. Some of these were loyal to the Zionists in charge, while others, like the group Lehi, renounced the Zionists in charge, but declared an open, violent fight against the British administration and the Arabs. This group committed a lot of terrorist attacks, like Arab groups would do it before, and stopped its activities after the conflict. But it was there during the conflict, and this group is also very often brought up as a series of atrocities made by the Zionists. But let's point out again that this group was a minority and was not in accordance with the Zionists in charge. The organization also wanted to install a totalitarian Hebrew state and seek alliance with Nazi Germany. A pretty stupid plan. Instead, the Grand Mufti Amin al-Husseini, whom we mentioned before, was in Germany by now and had come together with Hitler already. This is an important part of the conflict. The Mufti met Hitler and asked him to help rid Palestine of Jews and the Brits. Hitler didn't officially agree to anything, but he embraced the Mufti and his forces and promised that if Hitler won the war and the Arabs overpowered the Zionists, together they would eliminate any Jewish entity in Palestine. The Palestinian Mufti was now a Nazi ally and also part of the infamous SS. He made multiple speeches in which he called Jews the greatest enemies of humankind and the Muslims, accused them of being naturally despicable characters, supported conspiracy theories of the global Jews controlling the UK and the US, and advocated the removal of Jews from everywhere. He sounded very much like Hitler. Hitler also included Palestine in his speeches in the parliament, and with cooperation with the Mufti, the Nazis distributed a pamphlet to the Arabs in which Jews were described as the Dajjal, the prophesied false messiah in Islamic eschatology, who is also in Islamic scripture associated with Jews. Surprise. And Hitler was praised as the great leader who would kill the Dajjal. I don't think I have to expand much on that. Gladly, the two Nazis could never fulfill this plan, because Germany lost the war, and Hitler fled to Argentina, where he's still alive today. Just kidding, he's dead. In 1947, the Brits had enough. They wanted to withdraw from Palestine and terminate the mandate. So the United Nations General Assembly made an offer to the local parties, whether they accepted or not, a final offer. The solution was to partition the region into an Arab state, a Jewish state, and an internationally controlled Jerusalem, although Jerusalem was majorly Jewish. The Zionists didn't like it, but agreed. The Arabs had a different plan. The plan was adopted, Britain left, and civil war broke out immediately. The Jews were defensive. They were quick and declared the state of Israel during the civil war. With Israel becoming a state, the civil war turned into a war between nations. The Israeli-Arab War, also known as the Israeli War of Independence. It was now Israel and Israeli minorities against local Arabs, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the Muslim Brotherhood, volunteers from other countries, and briefly Lebanon. The problem is that all these Arab parties didn't really cooperate with each other because Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and all the others had their own interests in annexing Palestine instead of creating a Palestinian Arab state, a fact that many people today choose to ignore. Israel won the war, and with that, violence and oppression against Jews in the Arab world increased immensely, so that the Jewish exodus from the Arab world happened. In a short time, the vast majority of Jews from Arab countries were expelled or fled to Israel. Israel expelled local Arabs in return. This came to be known as the Palestinian Exodus, still a matter that is discussed today. In this war, Gaza was occupied by Egypt, while Jordan was annexed by the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel gained even more land than what was originally assigned, but the supposed Arab Palestine was now owned by neighboring Arab states. The Arab world dug themselves in a hole. This is what Israel had with the partition plan. And this is what they had now. Great job, Arab League. I really want to ask the question now, was this a great plan? Wouldn't it have ended much better for the Arabs if they had agreed to the original plan? Israel had now enough reason to expand its borders, and did that in war. Can they be blamed for this? Diplomatically, rationally, no. Emotionally, yes. After this, peace never really happened. Over the decades, local Palestinian Arabs staged dozens of attacks, together with Egypt and Jordan, and never gained anything from that. 18 years later, Egypt caused another war by closing the Straits of Tiran, a sea passage in the south, to Israeli ships. This was, as declared in 1955 by Israel, a war cause. Israel declared war immediately. Syria and Jordan joined on Egypt's side, and Israel won the war in 6 days, which is why the war is known as the Six-Day War. Another great humiliation to the Arab aggressors. As a result, Israel captured Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Now Israel was even bigger. The Arab League didn't learn from this mistake. They came together after this war and made a historic declaration known as the Three No's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiation with Israel. The Arab world agreed to this and showed that they weren't interested in settling this conflict without eradicating Israel that occupied such a huge region in the middle of the Arab world. Around this time, local Arabs finally came up with the idea to create their own organizations, stop trusting the Arab nations, and working to create their own Arab state. Well, to force their own Arab state. The organizations, PLO, PFLP, Fatah, and others, had different ideologies like Islamism, liberalism, or communism, but the aim was a one-state solution, without Jews. But seriously, they came up with this 15 to 20 years after Israel was formed. Before this, the land was just to be annexed by other existent Arab nations. Let's say it. Israel didn't steal anyone's land. This graph that you always see is completely misleading and wrong. A land for Palestinian Arabs was never the plan until now. In 1969, for the first time, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation was formed, an organization that included the entire Muslim world and sided with the Palestinian Arabs. It was only now that the global Muslims supported what they call Palestine today. In the 60s and 70s and further on, violent Palestinian organizations committed hundreds of attacks against Israeli citizens and politicians in Israel, the occupied territories, or outside. The most significant attack that attracted international attention was the Munich massacre in 1972, when a group called Black September took the Israeli Olympic team hostage during the 72 Summer Olympics. The terrorists killed the entire Israeli team, then killed a German police officer before they were killed.
Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They have now said that there were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms yesterday morning. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
This era was full of chaos, mass shootings, bombings, stabbings, aircraft hijackings, and so on. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out. This was a surprise attack by Egypt and Syria on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. The two nations declared war and attempted to invade Israel, despite heavy disapproval from their big ally, the Soviet Union. Israel won again. Soviet leader Brezhnev, who was an ally to Egypt and Syria, even made a humiliating statement after this war. He said that the Arabs wouldn't listen to reason and were only interested in fighting a hopeless fight. He even said that the Egyptian president called him at night and begged him for help, which Brezhnev refused. Syria and Egypt also committed atrocities against captive Israelis in this war. It was documented and proven that hundreds of Israelis were tortured and killed in captivity. This was a very difficult war. Israel agreed to retreat from the Sinai Peninsula and agreed with Egypt to find a peaceful resolution for Gaza and the West Bank. Israel had occupied these regions before in wars, but never annexed them. Afterwards, Egypt and Israel made peace for the first time and came together for resolutions. This was a problem, however, because the Arab League agreed before that no one could make peace with Israel. The Egyptian president Sadat was assassinated by Islamists for making peace with Israel. In the following decades, the First Intifada was launched, a massive uprising of Palestinian Arabs against Israel in order to crush the Zionists and establish one state, an Arab state. It was extremely bloody and was suppressed. The PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, declared Palestine to be an independent state nevertheless in 1988, without having any territory. The good thing was that this declaration also recognized Israel as a state for the first time after 40 years. Around the same time, an extremist Islamist organization was formed that would become very important later, Hamas. An openly anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, Islamic fundamentalist organization that would encourage, manage, and commit many terrorist attacks, including suicide bombings, in the following decades. An organization that was almost like ISIS at that time. Hamas also declared in their fundamental covenant that the Jews were behind every war and conflict in history, that the Holocaust was their product, that they provoked the Holocaust for their own interests, and so on. Talking points that are nowadays found among mentally challenged conspiracy theorists. They also made clear that death was holy to them, that their allegiance was to Allah, and that Islam would eventually eradicate Zionism. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority, led by the PLO, sought a different path. The Palestinian Authority entered the Oslo Accords in the 90s with Israel, where a solution was to be found, up until a summit in the year 2000. But the result was very strange. Israel offered to make peace, recognize Palestinian Authority, to free Gaza, and to give up the West Bank gradually, while also stopping or finding a proper solution to Israeli settlements in the West Bank. A great offer. What a hope for peace. Arafat, the leader of the PLO, rejected the offer and never made a counteroffer. In 2005, Israel retreated from Gaza completely. What happened instead is that Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza population elected a terrorist organization. Since then, Hamas has been active in a great peace process. Oh no, wait. Oh, Hamas has been active in firing missiles to Israel, organizing suicide bombings, broadcasting anti-Jewish propaganda on TV, organizing massive riots at the Israel border, sending children to the border, using international funds on military actions, turning UN buildings and schools into military posts, and so on. Occasionally, Hamas attacks Israeli citizens. Then Israel responds by evacuating targets and bombing them. In the media, you can see this as Israel bombed the Gaza Strip. Coming back to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, things are much better since Israel built a wall and made hefty military checkpoints in order to prevent further attacks from this site, as they had happened all the time before. But terrorists are still openly praised and celebrated in the streets. Families of dead terrorists are given rewards, and anti-Israel propaganda is everywhere. It almost looks like Palestinian Arabs don't even want peace or a state. Here is a list of times Palestinians were offered independence and peace. All of these were rejected, with no counter-offers. New talks happened, and a new one is expected soon in the next months. Israel is continuously establishing Jewish settlements in the West Bank, however, and if the conflict isn't resolved over the next decades, Israel could form a Jewish majority in the West Bank and could eventually absorb the West Bank. But the thing is, as mentioned before, Israel offered many times to give up these settlements, to come to a proper solution, to give the West Bank to Palestine. Yeah, it looks like the conflict will never end. Even if Israel came to a final agreement with the Palestinian Authority, Hamas is still ruling over the Gaza Strip. And Hamas insists on not recognizing the Palestinian Authority as their representative, on not recognizing Israel's existence, on being repeatedly impulsively violent against Israel, and pushing the same agenda: destroy the Zionist enemies. So what can we conclude about this conflict and the world? We see today that Jew hatred is disproportionately present in the Islamic world, and hating Israel and maintaining conspiracy theories is always the trend on television, even in the most secular countries like Turkey. Israel is called a terrorist state, an apartheid state. In Israel, every human, regardless of their religious or ethnic origins, has the same legal rights. Everyone can be a citizen. Every citizen can vote and be voted for, join the army, rise to the highest ranks, be successful in politics, teach, build whatever company they want to build. That is definitely not apartheid, not oppression. Outside of Israel, Gaza is no more under Israeli control. Gaza could choose to flourish and rise, but they choose to fight as if they were still a subject of Israel. World leaders who support Palestine all along find no fault in the Palestinian Arabs and fiercely criticize Israel, feeding on the global ignorance of the history of this conflict, while maintaining, without fully exposing, the still continuing Arab deal not to recognize any Israel and not to make any deals with it. Did you know that 15 countries do not allow any visitors that hold an Israeli passport? And some of them don't even accept visitors that merely visited Israel before. Where is the outrage about this? The Jewish population in the Muslim world has faded. Where is the outrage? While ideologues scream free Palestine, Palestine itself refused its independence multiple times. Where is the outrage? In global news, you hear of the Israeli violence against poor Arabs with rocks in their hands. When you see images like this, you think of courage and oppression. Here's something else to think about. What is a child doing there in a violent protest? Where is the outrage? Why is it that in every Muslim community, the Israel-Palestine conflict is brought up so that even Muslim activists from Somalia can fiercely speak about destroying and defeating Israel? Do the same people speak daily about North Korea? About Nigeria, where tribes kill civilians? About political violence in South Africa? About Turkey and Kurdistan? What unites people of a specific background and a specific faith in their hate for Israel? Can't we see that the Arab world and the Islamic world, with its collective mindset, fuels this conflict? Only recently, we have seen a major outrage around the world because the US announced to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Israel gained the right to do so half a century ago. Why would the US not recognize a majorly Jewish city annexed by Israel as the result of a defensive war as the capital of Israel? Where is the the outrage is there, it's just on the wrong side. Can't we see that on one side there is a sovereign state that has spent decades on military, on defense, on controlling borders, but also became a top contributor in science for the world? A country where Arabs have more rights than in the Arab world. While on the other side, we have two territories that contributed nothing to the world and live on donations from the world. Territories where you can't even produce anything of cultural or commercial significance because you have to be busy complaining and protesting all the time and suppressing culture and freedoms and punishing your own people. I'm kind of glad that Israel retreated from Gaza and left Gaza alone. This way everyone can see how such a territory acts. Israel has been standing loyal to the Zionist cause that Theodor Herzl introduced in his ideas of a Jewish state. Everything is clear to me. I don't need to pick a side. I can just look at it from a rational point of view and conclude that Israel has been a successful and peaceful country in the middle of troubled states where democracy and freedom is non-existent or a major failure. I don't even want to imagine what Palestine would look like if it had accepted the dozen offers for a sovereign state. We can just look at other countries in the region. Thanks for watching. If you have any issues with this episode, feel free to tell me in the comments section. If you like this video, don't forget to like, to subscribe and to share. Oh yeah, stay away from Islam.